Call the meeting back to order. It's Mr. Sweeney's turn with the rebuttal. So, and in this,
Mr. Chairman, did you ask me to proceed with the rebuttal, or are you looking to open up the floor for questions from the commission? We're happy to proceed.
We're going to have questions from the commission. Would you like to do this, or would you like to do your rebuttal, and then we'll have our questions?
I think a lot of my rebuttal might be answered in your questions. So I think typically the rebuttal is the last thing that I do.
So we'll go ahead at this time with the commission's questions.
There's a staff comments section too.
Oh, the staff? You want to do staff and then commission?
Sure.
We'll do the staff and then the commission.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief here. But the department prepared a report on the application for the commission. It uses the framework spelled out for large projects in the zoning regulations. The regulations call for a report that focuses on feasibility. It's what the regulations ask for. Basically, is it buildable or realistic? The report goes through, it's basically feasible in most areas, assuming Cottrell is one way and sewer issues are resolved as they're expected to be. However, the report's clear that in its emphasis on feasibility, it's not a substitute for the important value judgments that the commission has to make in a number of areas. The report doesn't recommend approval or denial of the application, and we're not going to recommend approval or denial now, because to do so wouldn't be appropriate considering the significant policy decision and imbalances of different factors that you have to make as the commission. We try not to take that role away from you here. As has been mentioned a lot, the NDD is a floating zone governed by a master plan developed by the property owner. As lots of people have said, you are using your legislative authority in deciding whether to change the zone. It's your highest level of authority here. Most other types of applications have to be approved if they meet the regulations. In this case, they're looking to amend the zoning map, so you have a lot more discretion to say yes or no. If the master plan's approved, they'll have to return with one or more detailed site plan applications, which will involve public hearings. These will include engineering details on grading, drainage, proposed bulkhead. Despite the required public hearing, the commission will be operating under their administrative authority at that point, where if it conforms to the already approved master plan and addresses under other standards like drainage, it'll basically have to be approved. Therefore, use your greater authority in discretion now in reviewing the master plan. That the master plan sets the parameters of the development, the things like uses, building placement, height, traffic parking issues. So if there are changes you want to see, now's the time to address them rather than in the site plan process. As far as the decisions and findings, ultimately the commission has to vote to approve, deny the application, or approve with modifications, but that decision's informed by a lot of individual findings. Our report, it does include a draft resolution to approve in case you decide to approve. That language basically says the right things if you with defensible reasons, if the approval's appealed. If you're leaning towards denying the application as you start discussing this, we recommend giving us time to spell out the denial reasons in a resolution. We don't do that ahead of time because we don't know the specific reasons that you would choose to deny something. As far as the specific individual things you're deciding, one of the main ones that was talked a lot was consistency with the POCD. Per state statutes, when deciding on a zone change, you have to consider whether it's consistent with the POCD, and the NDD regulations also require that of you. So a project like this touches on dozens of recommended policies in the POCD. The report lists them all and doesn't weigh them relative to each other. So I'm not going to go through all of those. One of the main things of the POCD is the future land use plan in there, which is intended to guide the zoning regulation and map changes and other decisions. The future land use plan recommends marine commercial at this location, which is defined in the plan as areas mainly devoted to water-dependent uses such as marinas and land and related uses. The proposal is to obviously rezone away from marine commercial, zone to NDD. MC80 does allow for non-water dependent uses. It doesn't just allow for marinas. So the commission has to determine if the proposal basically leaves enough marine commercial in the NDD master plan to be consistent with that recommendation, and whether the addition of other uses conflicts with that part of the plan. POCD has potentially negative and potentially positive policies in there. As far as the negative ones, discouraging new development in floodplain areas, recommendation to restrict certain facilities like hotels and flood hazard areas, protection of tidal wetlands could be something you look at, appropriate setbacks from coastal jurisdiction lines, promotion of water development uses. There's potential positive ones in there, providing coastal public access, providing a mix of uses in a village area, focusing new development in underutilized village areas and several economic development goals. The town adopted its coastal resilience plan as part of the POCD, as an appendix to that. And that plan analyzes the town's risk from coastal storm surge and sea level rise. Downtown Mystic's the most vulnerable area in town, really. The plan really focuses on more conceptual, large and small mitigation measures that were developed to increase resilience. The plan's focus wasn't really to judge specific development applications. The plan does recommend a coastal flood barrier in the area of the proposed bulkhead. At this point, it's unknown how much of the surrounding area will be protected by the bulkhead. That's more of a detail for the site plan application when those details are in hand. This plan also recommends public-private partnerships, cost-sharing approaches, pursuit of grants for those measures. As a whole, the proposal both increases risk by placing new residents, hotel guests, and structures near the coast, and it increases resiliency by adding the new bulkhead along the coast. So it's one of those balancing acts and decisions that the commission has to make here. Another decision is the comprehensive plan. State statutes require the commission's decision to conform to what the law calls the comprehensive plan. And that plan, it's not a specific document like the POCD. It's, according to state statutes, a combination of the zoning regulations and the zoning map. It's basically the town's vision for its development as spelled out in those. It's basically a check against extreme spot zoning. And the major question there seems to be whether the addition of the new uses instead of boat storage and repair makes that still consistent with the comprehensive plan. The NDD regulations themselves include a lot of decisions in a statement of purpose, rules, and waivers. While the NDD is not a conventional zone full of strict heights and setbacks, the language of the zone does include specific factors for the commission to consider. The main one is the statement of purpose, which is important, and I will read that here. The statement of purpose for the NDD in section 7.21.2 is, the NDD is intended to encourage the reclamation of underused commercial, if I can read it correctly, commercial parcels and permit new construction, renovation, and/or adaptive reuse at these sites, promote diversified housing opportunities, including but not limited to mixed-use development uses, and preserve and enhance the town's historic character, sensitive environmental resources in these neighborhoods in the village cores. The zone is intended to allow for the establishment, continuation, and expansion of such uses and activities in ways that will maintain and enhance compatibility with surrounding neighborhoods. Factors to be considered by the Commission in approving the NDD include Proposed uses in layout and conformity with and in furtherance of the goals and objectives contained in the POCD. Harmony and compatibility with surrounding residential neighborhoods, land uses in the village cores, including adequate buffers that are consistent with the existing condition on the site. Neighborhood and/or village core, promotion of pedestrian safety, provision for adequate parking, minimized impact of motor vehicles, and prevention of glare to adjacent properties from lighting on site. To the extent practical, commercial traffic shall be directed to major thoroughfares and away from residential streets, and also furtherance of the goals, standards, and policies of the Connecticut Coastal Area Management Act. The NDD also has language about performance buffers and other guidance, which says the commission will carefully analyze any buffers between the NDD and surrounding residential neighborhoods and may tailor buffers to include greater setbacks, landscaping, fences, walls, and berms, considering the relative heights of the uses on each side of the buffer. Now, this proposal requires two specific waivers of the NDD regulations. Despite being in the NDD, the site is still subject to the coastal design height of only 24 feet from the base flood elevation because it's 150 feet from the coast. So it's really only approvable if the commission grants the waiver as allowed in Section 735 of the regulations. So the regulations set that rule but allow you to waive it, basically. The NDD also requires a 50-foot non-infringement area from tidal marsh and coastal waters, except for boating facilities. So the application is only approvable if you deem those waivers worthy here. The other thing for the commission to decide is the conformance with the Coastal Management Act. Consistency with this act, it's specifically called out in state statutes and in the NDD regulations. The act includes several policy goals geared towards protection of the coastal resources, enhancement of coastal public access, and preservation of water-dependent uses along the coast. So just to go over them per state statutes, the commission has to consider the following factors for amendments to the zoning map or regs. The character and distribution of the coastal resources within its coastal boundary, capacity and limitations on such resources to support development, types of methods and development compatible with wise use, protection, and enhancement of such resources, the nature and pattern of existing development, and the need for public services. As previously read into the record, DEP recommends denial on the following grounds: diminishment of a water-dependent use on a waterfront site, increasing risk to life and property by siting new residences in a FEMA flood zone, risk to tidal wetlands, conflicts of POCD, public access not commensurate with the loss of an existing boatyard, the future flood and erosion control walls. It won't be permitted for residential non-water dependent uses. Ultimately, the statutes do establish the commission as the judge of whether the application meets this act as well as the POCD. DEP has given their opinion, but it is a local and not a state permit. If it is approved, DEP does have the right to appeal the decision. Some factors not in the DEP letter is public access is defined as a water-dependent use. The act doesn't really get into how much specific activities a marina has to engage in. So some key questions for this specific decision is, does the replacement of certain marina structures like boat repair and storage with additional coastal public access amount to an inappropriate diminishment of water-dependent use? Does the addition of other non-water dependent uses like the hotel, residential, and restaurant amount to an adverse impact on the marina or on future water dependent development opportunities? Do these changes still conform to the POCD's recommendation for marine commercial uses at this location and other POCD goals to maintain water dependent uses? Should the commission allow a zone change that would enable substantial new residential development in a flood hazard area within the CAM boundary? Does the proximity of the development to tidal wetlands present an unacceptable risk to coastal resources? And are there modifications to the master plan that can address potential issues with the act? Just other very general considerations. Do you have enough information on whether the property should be rezoned? If not, get it now at the master plan stage while the hearing is still open. And are there modifications to the plan that you think would enhance its design or better protect neighboring property owners from any negative impact? As far as other specific things to clarify with some things with traffic, just a reminder that the traffic study is based on converting Cottrell Street to one-way south. Approving this plan wouldn't necessarily make that happen. It would still be up to the Police Commission, Selectmen, Board of Finance, whether to modify the road layout and fund associated changes with that. So if it's approved, it'd be recommended to have some sort of stipulation linking site plan approval or construction to making Cottrell Street one way. Traffic's one of the big impacts here. The weight of the project's traffic impact is a relative one for the commission. Level of service and traffic studies, they're a guide to anticipating the impacts of congestion. How much additional traffic is too much for the community is, it's one of the many hard questions for the commission here. And parking is sort of a similar issue. Parking, the numbers were, if you go by adding up all the numbers conventionally required by zoning, they'd need 387 spaces. With 318 provided on site, that's an 18% reduction. When you add in their off-site spaces proposed within 500 feet, they get to 372. If you count the Packer building ones, that's 428. So it's, the commission's approved shared parking in village areas before, but it's sort of one of these areas for the commission to decide how much is appropriate in this case. As far as building heights, one note is that since grading plans haven't been submitted, it's possible that the buildings could be constructed at raised elevations, making them higher than if they're constructed at current grades. So that's something to keep in mind with the building heights. So it helps with flood safety, but makes them taller relative to their surroundings. We requested clarification about the accuracy of the relative heights in the 3D renderings. The response was that they're accurate with apparent discrepancies due to the existing grades. That might be something to, for them to talk about during the rebuttal here. Architectural Design Review Board reviewed this on a preliminary basis. Generally had positive comments. They recommended that the commission hire an urban design consultant to help provide input at this stage of the process. Efforts to find someone weren't really productive at this point. So if the commission was gearing towards approving this, we'll come up with recommended stipulations that will arise out of your deliberations. As far as the time frame, the maximum that this hearing can go is August 15th, and that's with the maximum extension granted by the applicant, which we don't know if they'll grant that far. So, August 15th. That's the maximum it could go with extensions from the applicant, which we don't. August. Yeah, that's only the maximum the hearing could go with their permission. Because according to state law, we need their permission to have the hearing. Yeah, right.
Without an extension, what's the maximum?
Well, we're already at the point where they've given us an extension to get this far. So even to extend one more day with the hearing, we'd need their permission to do that. Otherwise, we'd have to close the hearing tonight. You wouldn't have to decide tonight. You'd still have 65 days to decide. But even if we want to continue the hearing just to next week, we need their permission to do so per state law. And finally, Connecticut general statutes state that property owners who are adjacent to a zone change can force a supermajority vote by submitting a protest petition. So if the owners of 20% of the area of the lots within 500 feet of the zone change submit a petition, 4 out of 5 votes will be needed to approve this application. A protest has been submitted today, so we can't determine tonight whether it meets the statute. We'll have to analyze that with the help of the town attorney and our GIS consultant, because there are a lot of gray areas in what you count and what you don't count. And we'll have to measure that exactly, but we'll let you know the results of that when you decide one way or the other.
Keith, a procedural question. If we can't close this hearing tonight, well, I guess you're saying we have to close this hearing tonight unless we get approval to extend, unless we get an extension from the applicant. So without that extension, then we're put in a position where don't we have to deny this application because we don't have grounds to conclude that we could approve it? I mean, we just don't have time to get there.
Well, once you close the hearing, you'd still have 65 days to debate it and consider it, but at that point, the applicant's shut out from the discussion. So, I mean, if that might be the conclusion you come to. You know, if you feel that you need more information that you didn't get, that might be the conclusion you come to.
I mean, the board is being shut out of the discussion if we have to close the hearing.
What is the difference between a denial and a condition?
Microphone, please.
You may have to turn it on.
What is the difference between a denial and not approve? I mean, we're being asked to either approve or not approve. Where I didn't understand where that isn't there a difference between I'm voting not to approve and to deny?
No, I'm seeing them as the same thing. You know, you'd vote to approve or deny. I mean, maybe it's just two different ways of saying the same thing, to not approve it or to deny it.
Mr. Chairman, may I be heard on this issue?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the applicant, again, Bill Sweeney, legal counsel, it's, by my watch, it's 10:51, and it would be a shame if the commission did not have adequate time to ask my client pertinent questions related to the application. My client is willing to provide a short extension of time to continue this hearing to your July 16th meeting. I understand this room may be available. I understand that the public participation portion of the hearing is over, but it would be unfair, I think, to force you to try to make a decision on this application without even having a chance to ask us questions you may have, particularly because I asked you not to ask questions during our presentation to keep the ball rolling, and I asked you to write those questions down and so we could come back to them and talk about it. It's also almost 11 o'clock, and my brain doesn't work that well after 11, and I'm sure a lot of other people's don't either. So I'd be willing to extend, again, to July 16th as long as we can focus on questions.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Point of order.
Who's calling? Yeah.
The citizens have not had an opportunity to ask questions of the commission. I understand the commission can ask questions of the applicant, but the citizens also have an opportunity to ask questions of the commission. And the
citizens have had their turn.
They
Now
talked, yes, they spoke, but they got no answers.
No, but we heard you.
All right.
All right.
And I certainly will do my best to answer those questions
The rebuttal
that
will
were
answer
made.
the questions. The applicant will answer your commission's question, the public's questions, if we can't answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If we can have it the 15th?
16.
Which day's that?
Tuesday, July 16th,
A week from today, tomorrow.
7 p.m. at this location.
All right. Is everybody agreeable? Here. Fine.
Be here.
All right.
Again, Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, the purpose of that hearing is to allow us to interact with the commission and for me to provide a rebuttal.
Yeah, I understand that. That's what we're waiting
Right,
for.
and the extension will be given to that date. Thank you.
We want to have it here because I want to be able to have the public, room for the public. We can't go to middle school, and there's no air conditioning there either. So,
We want to be really clear here. So we are not closing the public hearing tonight.
no, we're going to continue it to next Tuesday. That's correct. 15th.
16th,
16th?
Tuesday, the 16th.
It's 1/6?
Yes.
I'm not hearing you.
Tuesday, July 16th,
Okay.
7 p.m. at this location.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
If we can have a motion to continue the
Continue
public
the-
hearing.
The next meeting after the rebuttal, if there's any new information brought up during the rebuttal, the public has to respond.
The question is about new information presented by the applicant. Will the public have a chance to ask questions of new information?
Mr. Chairman, we do not intend to submit any new information.
Any new information? Okay, thank you. Do I hear a motion to continue
Motion
the
to
hearing
continue.
till the 16th at 7 o'clock?
Not everybody's going to be here, so do you want to give the people who are unable to attend a chance to ask their questions tonight?
No,
Meaning on the committee
I can't hear you.
for the next 10 minutes?
Commissioners or what?
Commissioners, yeah.
No, we can just do it next week, next Tuesday. You can't make it? Well, can everyone else make it?
I can make it.
You all make it next week? So we have enough.
Write down your questions.
Write down your questions and give them to Lynn or something. Okay. Do I hear, we have a motion on the floor to continue the hearing?
Motion to continue.
A second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Meeting continued next.
Did you motion to adjourn?
Adjourn.